with a historical marker. And incidentally, it's not there now. But I'm not going to give them any peace until they put it back. The road was widened and it disappeared. And I saw a brief summary of the story of a man named Jack Henson, Confederate sniper, how he had been, his two sons had been murdered by occupation troops, and he had set out to get vengeance, and by the end of the war he had killed 36, or I think it says he had 36 notches on his rifle. That was not true. He had 36 1/8-inch circles on the rifle, and that was the way he kept a record of his confirmed kills. By the end of the war, he had killed well over 100, but he only counted 36 because if he couldn't walk up to them and put his foot on the body, he didn't put the mark on his rifle. He was, and I don't know how much of this story to tell, so if it gets to be unbearable, just raise your hand and I'll stop. As most of you know, he lived 3 miles southwest of here on what is now called the Keel Hollow Road. What is now the Keel Hollow Road was his lane. That was the lane that ran from his front gate to the Dover Road. And he had a plantation there called Bubbling Springs. And the springs really do bubble. It's one of the most beautiful little bodies of water I've ever seen. And they become the headwaters of a creek that runs along Keel Hollow Road from south to north called Henson Creek. He was a very prosperous plantation owner and businessman. He was a natural, astute businessman. Teresa and I have been helping one another in research, and she has just discovered that she's identified some building lots in Dover that had belonged to him before the war. And he had other businesses. He bought and sold real estate. He bought and sold land in Henry County and in Camden's the county seat. What's the county? Benton County. And he had a large number of slaves for that time and place. Your typical slave-owning farmer before the war had about 10. He had about 30. And he considered them to be part of his family, and they were treated that way. He didn't call them slaves, he called them his servants. And it was really a kind of an idyllic situation there until the war came. And he wasn't interested, like most people between the rivers. He just wanted to be left alone. But that never works. It takes two to make peace, but it only takes one to make a fight. And the war came to him. Part of the battle for Fort Donelson was fought on his land. He had a speaking acquaintance with Grant and was pals with the Confederate generals. And on the climactic day of the battle on Saturday, he went back and forth on the battlefield and gave information to both sides. He was what I call uniquely neutral. I've heard people call him a Union man, but he wasn't. And he wasn't a Confederate man. He was just a neutral man. Until the war moved on, and the occupation troops came in behind it, the 5th Iowa Cavalry, and they seized 2 of his sons, who were squirrel hunters, accused them of being bushwhackers, executed them on the roadside. Incidentally, we've identified the spot. I'm hoping to have a historical marker put there sometime and one up where his house was. But they executed them, dragged the bodies around the courthouse square, cut their heads off, and put the heads on the old man's gateposts, which of course made an instant enemy of him. He quietly set out to get vengeance. He had a special rifle made, 50 caliber. 50 caliber is what you shoot airplanes down with. But he did this because he needed one for long-range accuracy. He got most of his kills between 600 and 800 yards with open sights. He had the rifle made in Lewis County. At the time the book was finalized, all we knew about the gunmaker was his initials, W.E.G. And as it often happens, within a couple of weeks after it was too late to matter, I found out who the gunmaker was, where he worked, and when he worked. His name was County. And I think that's typical of Princeton's thinking. He was just a naturally bright, think-ahead kind of a guy. Because Lewis County is 2 counties removed to the southeast, it was close enough that he could go check on it when he wanted to, but it was far enough away that this unusual rifle wouldn't automatically be associated with him. And the rifle is a typical Kentucky rifle except for 2 things. One, that 50 caliber, that's most unusual. Most of them were around 32 caliber. And 2, it's so plain. It has no inlaid brass or gold or silver, no fancy stuff on it. There's not one reflective surface on that rifle. And I think that's like its owner, because he was strictly business and the rifle was just strictly for business. He managed to maintain an innocent persona for a while. He had a son named Robert who was a natural leader. Had he lived, I think he would be thought of today in the same category with Forrest, or John Hunt Morgan, or John Singleton Mosley, or Highland Lyon, because he was just like Forrest, a natural. And he organized a guerrilla cavalry company and commanded it until he was killed. And he was captured 3 times. Escaped 3 times. He kept the Union people completely confused because he kept changing his name and changing the unit that he was supposed to belong to. Robert, of course, was well known, and everybody knew that he was Jack Kempson's son. So the suspicion was automatically there, and it was automatically there because it was widely known that his 2 sons had been brutally murdered and mutilated the way they had been. So there was some sympathy with him because of that, and also they handled him gently because of his acquaintance with Grant. And most people don't know this, but you know, Grant almost lost everything at Fort Donelson. I learned in the research from an interview with Major Cheers that the Union officer, you know, when it was surrendered on Sunday morning, there was no reason to surrender because they had won a glorious victory the day before and had Grant's army stampeding back towards Fort Henry until Lew Wallace saved the day and changed history forever. Because my mind was completely blank. Somebody please tell me where I was going with this. Grant was handed a victory on Sunday morning, the 16th of February, 1862, that he definitely had not won, had not earned. It was a bloody, amazing gift handed to him by those clowns, Pill and Floyd. And I told you, I was going to say, I learned from an interview with Major Cheers that I found that he had, the big problem the Confederates had was to convince the Union that they really wanted to surrender, because the Union people thought it was a trick. They knew they'd been whipped thoroughly the day before, and they thought it was a trick. And so poor Major Cheers was given the job of going through the lines and finding Grant to take his message from Buckner. And his problem was that nobody believed him. Nobody believed that there really was going to be a surrender.